programs. These are all things where there's a tremendous amount of focus, and businesses, again, have really stepped up in these areas. So the net of this is that, when we talk about how and why engagement has improved, we've really seen this trust in leaders increase. Senior leaders have really demonstrated this sincere interest in employee well-being and safety. And the bottom line is that trust and confidence in the job being performed by leaders has been very positive through this experience. So let's bring it forward. McKinsey helped us out with some really fresh research, which has came out in June, which was great, because what McKinsey is telling us is that, yes, that happened, it's still happening, and we need to build on that trust that has been earned in terms of how we as organizations and leaders behaved in the early parts of the pandemic. And what McKinsey's research is showing us is that employees who say that their organizations responded particularly well, they're 4 times more likely to be engaged and 6 times more likely to report a positive state of well-being. So let's pause here for just a moment. The bottom line is employees are paying attention to how we are responding, what we're doing. And again, those organizations that are doing this well are having higher levels of engagement, which clearly is going to carry us forward. So what do we do with all of this? What do we do now? Well, again, through McKinsey's research, they've identified these 4 key actions that we can focus on. The first one, we need to make it credible. And what we mean by this is we need to listen to our employees. We need to give them airtime through town hall surveys, pulse surveys. Leaders need to continue to speak really transparently and empathetically about what employees are going through. We need to use data that we're able to collect now through those surveys. We need to use that data, communicate those findings to employees, and apply some credibility to the changes that we're implementing, the decisions that we're making. The second thing here, we need to make it feasible. And what we mean by this is we can't just wait for transformative change to happen to us. We need to really get out there and create these solutions, pushing, again, responsibility out and down, and creating these channels for employees to communicate and work well together, whether those are digital channels or otherwise. We need to make it sustainable. And what we mean by this is employees need to believe that all of the things that we're doing today, these things that we're implementing, these things that we've changed, the education we're providing, how we're engaging with one another, that those things will live beyond this crisis. It's really tough to emotionally invest. And if we talk about engagement, that is that emotional investment. It's tough to emotionally invest in something that you're not sure is going to hang around when the bad times are over. And so it is really important that we help our employees to see that this is sustainable and will continue beyond the crisis. And then we need to make it personal. And what we mean by this is we need to put employees in charge of their own journeys. And we can do this by giving them information, communication, tools and resources, the support that they need so that they can build their own journeys and take responsibility for that. So we're going to push forward and talk about learning. So it's interesting, and I've mentioned this already, and I'll kind of stay down this path. Employees today are really more in need of coaches than bosses. And what we know, Gallup tells us here, in normal times, just about a quarter of employees say that they get the feedback that they need to do better work when things are okay. Well, we know that when employees get feedback, they do better work. And especially now when we're in these very remote environments, it's even more critical to engage with employees and provide them the coaching and support that they need. We need to be emphasizing critical skills. When we think about our workforce of the future, yes, we need to emphasize critical skills We need to help employees to have the skills they need to perform their job. But what's interesting about what Gallup is telling us is that where they're seeing and anticipating the greatest skills gaps is really more along the lines of those behavioral skills. Things like building relationships, leading change, inspiring others, thinking critically, communicating clearly, creating accountability. These are all behavioral skills that when we think about the workforce of the future, these are really going to come into play. And as we're putting together learning programs today in the environment that we're in now, these are things to really be thinking about. Some of the best things we can be doing today as we're creating our learning environments are really creating these, virtual networks of learners. And this is creating these blended approaches, which are the most effective. We need to be really encouraging peer-to-peer learning. We're going to talk a little bit more about this, but we are doing so much work today as teams, and this peer-to-peer learning where we're learning from our team members and colleagues is really critical right now. Of course, in order to do this well, we have to have the technology in place in order to communicate in this way and learn from one another in this way. But also encouraging peer-to-peer learning helps to encourage a culture of feedback. And you can see how all of these things are cycling together today. So really, this is the time to, reassess our employment development strategy. Again, individuals want to learn about what's going on in their work and their job and the business and the crisis and the economy. And again, this component about resiliency, I know that's kind of the hot new word. We keep hearing resiliency and hearing about it, but it is, if there's something that we can help our employees to have some stronger skills, this is certainly that area. So as we talk about learning of the future, we keep talking about, it's how important it is to have technology in place to do this. So let's talk a little bit about the evolution of online learning. So the online learning industry has always been fairly robust. When there's ever a big shakeup in the marketplace, the online learning industry really is pretty quick to adapt. And it started really kind of in earnest back in the around 98-ish. And this is when all the corporate universities, businesses, it was all about putting their content online, and these corporate universities emerged. And we got groups like SkillPath. Well, then we moved into the time of, say, Google, YouTube, iPhone, and the video learning really came into play. Well, then we learned that we had too much content out there. And so this is where these true content delivery systems came into play, like Percepio, Cornerstone. And then we moved into this space where it's really around virtual reality, where virtual reality being these, on-demand access to these real-world scenarios in a safe environment. But today, it really is around what we're calling these integrated platforms. So rather than having these, yard sales of learning with everything out there, employees, they want a place where they can go in a safe environment, where they can engage in learning with their peers, with instructors, in all of these different types of formats. And these integrated platforms really allow businesses to do that. And so what we really need to remember is that this is the greatest learning opportunity ever. People are learning about viruses and pandemics and how to work from home. And we're really learning how to adapt our businesses in a world where safety, quality, and trust really become the number one priorities. So we're going to push forward here and talk a little bit about performance. So I mentioned this earlier, team performance is absolutely accelerating. Collective thinking is here. We are working more closely together in groups and teams. You can call them pods, you can call them networks, but we are coming together to work collectively. Some research here shows that, again, if we're talking about how our workforce is feeling positive about their employer, 96% of people who rate their company positively believe that they're being treated well and fairly by their peers. And so this all gets to this sense of how we are working together. And if we think about, what we can and should be doing as, business leaders, it's creating these environments and encouraging this type of performance. So teams are coming together to listen, talk, work on projects. Relationship building is more important than it ever has been. So, the days of being the first one to come into the office and the last one leaving, the days of that being evidence of commitment or high performance, those days are gone. In the post-COVID world, performance is really going to be measured by what gets done and the value of that work. And this is really interesting because when we can't see our workforce, we have to be able to look at the quality of work. I know, I'm glad those days are gone too. Right? We have to be able to look at performance in a different kind of way. What this means, though, is that we have to, as leaders, we have to provide the utmost clarity in what the outcome-driven expectations are. So this is one of the things that I know has been challenging, but if ever there was a time to be talking with our workforce and our teams more, talking really clearly about outcomes, and then again, having that performance assessment be based on those outcomes as opposed to how long it took you to come in and whether you were in the office every day. That's where we're really shifting from what gets done to the value. Motivating employees in these types of environments, we are going to have models and measurements there, meaning, what are the baseline things that our employees need to exist? And then how do we build upon that to provide motivation and putting measures around that? We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So again, performance metrics have to be really clear. And we need to level set expectations for driving organizational priorities and goals. We mentioned again, and I'm going to keep coming around to this, that engaged employee wants to know, how do I contribute? What are the overarching goals of the organization today in this environment? How does my job relate to that, and how can I contribute? So the only way we can do this is if we are level setting these expectations around what the overall organizational priorities and goals are. So one of the things that I want to spend a little bit of time on some performance management pitfalls. So this concept of the ideal worker, if you haven't heard about this, it's been around for decades. The ideal worker is this concept that of a worker being on 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. And the idea that anyone thought that was a good idea. But there is this concept of this ideal worker and somebody that operates in that way. And don't get me wrong, there are some industries that do have more of a 24/7 concept, legal, finance, and individuals are compensated well for that kind of work environment. But in general, that's not the kind of environment that we have and that is productive. And a lot of it is, somebody being available to work 24 hours a day also assumes full-time caretaking at home. But if you look here at the box, the inset here, we know that more than 75% of single parents work, and in a home with two parents, 64% of those homes, both of those parents work. And so again, this concept of the ideal worker, it doesn't match with our society and the way that we work. So that being said, one of the pitfalls that we're experiencing in this pandemic is we have started to press these expectations on our workforce in general. Why? Well, because technology makes it possible, and we've pushed all of the, if we're all working from home and our computer and workstation is at the kitchen table, right? A pitfall is this expectation that our employees who used to come into the office and work for a period of time now are simply available all of the time because they're home and it's possible. So we need to really be careful about that. We're also, it's really fascinating. We've been seeing, especially in the earlier times of the pandemic, this concept of this 24/7 expectation being pushed out on jobs that we would never before have those expectations. There's a lot of, frontline workers, grocery stores, things like that, where suddenly we have these expectations, but we're not necessarily doing anything to help care for that workforce, and especially remuneration systems that tie up with that concept. So we also need to be careful about rewarding the faster response over a better response, and we also really need to be careful about rewarding that longer workday over a more productive workday. So when we think about some of the investments that we've already made in this remote working, and what are some of those things that we are going to carry forward in a productive way into our reimagined future workforce. Number one, a potentially positive impact on remuneration systems like we just talked about. How are we looking at work performance? What does productivity mean? And what are measures around that? Insights into HR opportunities. Again, how can we be rehabbing our performance management programs? What is high performance? This also gets into onboarding and broader talent programs. We clearly are creating more flexible and agile operating models through technology, through learning and education, through our communication, through how we're structuring our workforce into teams, and how we're communicating with one another, and those channels that we're creating. We are creating these corporate cultures that are more connected both internally and externally. And again, we're aligning our business goals to these new cultural standards. These new cultural standards being around trust, safety, quality, and engagement and teamwork. So I'm going to throw a question out to the crowd, and I would love to get your thoughts on this before we dive into this next section, which is around recruiting. When you think about recruiting, what are the things, the one thing or things that are concerning you the most about recruiting in this post-pandemic environment? I'm just going to pause there. What are the things that are concerning you the most about recruiting in this post-pandemic environment? Just throw it in the chat box. Would love to see your comments.
Can we just talk? Do you want us just to say them instead?
Sure, absolutely, absolutely.
I just feel like I could say it faster than I can. I'm sorry I'm late. By the way, I came on after you had started, but I would say the uncertainty, specifically around schooling, when people are going to be able to be available, essentially availability, like it's the unknown loom of school, somebody gets sick, they get sick. Mm-hmm. And I think it's one of the things that's been highlighted several times is the unfortunateness of the setback this has on women in the workforce.
Yeah, great comment. Great comment. Other comments. What is concerning you the most about recruiting in this post-pandemic environment?
Well,
I would agree.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, David.
Sorry, didn't mean to.
No. Go ahead.
Somewhat the uncertainty of being able to establish relationships, which is what my business is built on, remotely in small chunks. That we can't get together, we can't easily socialize as well. We try to set up simulated environments for doing that. A number of things that we do in my business is to set up chat groups where it's basically like having a bunch of people over for lunchtime, and we'll all sit around and talk about different things, and there will be probably a 20-minute presentation in the middle, and then we'll sit around and talk a bit and drink a little bit and things like that, and then go off. But it's still not the same as being there. And it's harder to get a real sense, especially of new people just coming into the group even, and more so when it's one-on-one, being able to have the time to develop that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you, David. That's definitely, we all share those concerns. Absolutely. I think there was one other comment somebody was trying to say. It was share another comment before we dive back in. Is that?
Yes, so actually I was going to say what basically what David just said, but sort of add on that in recruiting, you know, if you're moving to the next step of onboarding someone, there is a disconnect. I was onboarded during COVID, and so I've never met the people that I'm working with.
Isn't that crazy?
And it's a very different experience. And so matching that with what Dave Peterson wrote, with what Heather wrote, putting all of that together and trying to figure out, you know, or even fathom the state of mind where people are right now. I think it's just, it's so multifaceted right now, and so uncertain, as was said.
Yeah, right.
Well, too, is because of the time, people have an acute mentality right now. It's like we speak a lot in terms of pre-COVID and right now. And then I feel people are making decisions on the right now because it's almost a survival mode that we're all in to a certain degree. And I don't know if, you know, how that will affect applicants looking for a job to get through this period versus looking for a long-term career, because the mindset right now is so acute.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I'm sharing my own story here, but what we're going to talk about is that you know, candidates, they are on the move. You know, that candidates are moving. They're, you know, top talent. They're it's not like it was during the last recession where there were no jobs out there and employees were just holding on and just trying to, you know, ride the storm out. You know, people are moving around. They're taking other jobs, and so it's put that whole, you know, recruiting environment kind of in a little bit of a tailspin. In hesitation to relocate for a job, yeah, absolutely. Multiple demands at home, people grabbing a job versus a career. We're going to talk about that relocation piece too. So thank you so much for those comments. That helps a lot. This is, I love to share this piece. So LinkedIn put out a really great article in last October. So October of 2019. And it was about the state of recruiting at that time, okay? So back in October 2019, LinkedIn said that the demand for recruiters had increased 63% since 2016. Recruiters are taking on more of an advisory role, more strategic, from a workforce management standpoint, really helping businesses to incorporate talent acquisition into their overall business strategies. And therefore, 1 in 3 recruiting heads is coming out of biz dev, operations, and sales, not necessarily what we're, you know, typically see through the HR or TA track. Absolutely, recruiters using metrics more than in the past. Recruiters are clearly going to need new skills. Technology investment will increase. And again, this was nearly a year ago. The #1 priority for recruiting organizations over the next 5 years would be keeping pace with the rapidly changing hiring needs. Well, and then this happened. And this is, you know, this is literally what came on the heels of those, you know, kind of premonitions. And so, you know, a radical change to recruiting and onboarding is needed today in response to this. And so it's really interesting. You know, clearly the demand for highly skilled remote workers is going to continue to increase. So we have this very interesting space where we have this group of remote workers that happened as a result of COVID. But now that we're here, as we recruit and onboard new talent, we have this whole different perspective around remote working that simply didn't exist in the past. Some companies are still holding back on recruiting, while others are literally hiring in mass. technology is going to continue to transform our ability to recruit. Preparedness for hiring managers and candidates, and this was alluded to a little bit, simply sending out a Zoom link to a candidate and a hiring manager and telling them to have at it is absolutely not the right way to create a positive candidate experience. It's not the way to be able to identify and converse with candidates. So we're really encouraging people to, train hiring managers on how to effectively work with a candidate virtually, how to go through a meaningful selection process in this different environment. And it's also, again, if we're trying to create a positive candidate experience, it's doing the same with those candidates. We shouldn't assume that every candidate has been on 100 Zoom conversations over the last few months, because maybe they have, maybe they haven't. And so these are just some, from a recruiting standpoint and candidate, in preparation for a positive experience, these are some things that we need to do. Other things that that we have to keep in mind: the job of today versus the job in 3 months, 6 months, 24 months. This is probably one of the biggest challenges that employers are facing. And the comments from David, Elizabeth, and others, where we're talking about, how we're engaging with one another, what sort of communication structure we have in place. When we think about if you're getting ready to hire, whatever the role is, we have to take into consideration these facets that we haven't had to in the past. Because take a role, for example, that, perhaps your organization, mine, for example, we're still basically 100% virtual. We have, of course, some essential workers that are going into the office, but otherwise we're 100% virtual. It's similar to, I'm sure a lot of you, it was, okay, after the 4th of July, well, then after Labor Day, well, now it's after the first of the year. And now I keep hearing the term in the spring. I don't know what that means, but I'm actually in the middle of a hiring process right now. I'm in the process of hiring a consultant to join the team. And we're having to, contemplate all of these different components. It's one thing that is interesting is, and a lot of my team has always been virtual, but I do have a core team that does work in our Chicago office. And just the way that we're looking at our openness to where the candidates may be and how we'll be communicating and how we're working with our clients going forward. We anticipate that recruiting will be done largely by internal teams, but of course still using external sources for more niche roles and things like that. And again, we have to consider that interview and selection process. You may have a role today that is 100% virtual, and as you're considering candidates, those candidates want to know, what's the status of the role today? Well, let me back it up. They want to know through the interview process, am I going to need to come into an office? Before we used to, we'd offer the opportunity to meet members of the team and come in, office role, all that's out the window now. And so we have to come up with these other ways to engage with candidates. So candidates get what they need in order to make their own decisions. And then if you want to pile on just the safety protocols of a business, candidates want to know, what are the social distancing protocols, what's in place, who's coming in the office, am I expected to travel, will I be expected to travel, how, so these are all components that, as HR professionals or those that are driving the hiring process, it just adds this whole layer of complexity that we haven't had to utilize in the past when we're engaging with with candidates. Before we move off of that, I'm just going to pause because I think there is some really good discussion here, and I'd love to just kind of throw it back out. Recruitment by internal team, thoughts expanded and better defined. Yeah, so thanks for the question there, Dave. What we mean by that, I'm going to take a step back. we're in an environment now where the volume of applicants is enormous. And again, I kind of harken back to 2008. The role of the recruiter or the recruiting team has shifted, whereas 6 months ago, it was around sourcing and strategizing on how to go out and find candidates to bring into your pipeline. And, pipeline management was, like I said, all about how to find people to bring into the pipeline. Well, now pipeline management is, what do I do with these 400 applicants for one accounting job? And the applicants range from entry-level bookkeepers to CFOs. And so now your recruiting team is dealing with these volumes of applicants that require sorting, screening, tracking. Technology plays a huge role here. And so where we anticipate this, the internal teams piece is going to come into play is really managing that funnel of applicants and creating your pipelines in a different way, which arguably takes more hands-on, more staff. Again, technology will help make that easier. But if you're an organization, then think about organization that's, tracking applicant data for a host of different reasons. And so this is where, like I said, we anticipate that internal teams will simply bear the brunt of a lot of this. Is motivation for some groups to consider that, RPO, recruitment process outsourcing route, to get away from the weight of having to manage that influx of candidates. But just the way we're looking at what pipeline management means today, it's completely different than what it looked like 6 months ago. The other challenge with this many applicants in the market is your selection processes have to be really well defined and narrowed down on, because the number of highly qualified top talent that is sitting out there unemployed right now is, again, higher than it might typically be. So we're just having to, our selection processes have a different tone and element to them as well. So that's where, data is showing that internal teams are going to bear the brunt of a lot of this, still using external recruiters for, like I said, more than those niche roles that are, harder to find. I will share a story about this whole concept about relocation and geography. I mean, the bottom line is geography just really doesn't matter anymore. It may, again, in the future when things, we will, at some point, things will get back to something. But right now, geography really doesn't matter anymore, because we're preponderance of us are working from home. I have a colleague, she's a corporate attorney, and there was a firm that she wanted to work with for a number of years. She lives in Chicago, and the firm that she wanted to work for had locations in Los Angeles and New York. And she was never a viable candidate in their eyes because she did not want to relocate to LA or New York. Well, she started working for them about 3 weeks ago because they completely changed their perspective on what geography meant. And they were all about going after, the company changed their perspective, and they realized that going after, this gets back to the performance conversation, that, bringing somebody on board that has the right qualities and skills and capabilities and is going to be able to put out a more valuable output for them was more important than where that individual lived. So those are just, all things to really kind of keep in mind there. All right. So I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to check our time. I'm going to talk faster. I'm going to take just a moment to talk a little bit about your employee value proposition. And, your employee value proposition really encapsulates that employee experience and communicates it to not only your workforce, but that workforce of the future, the community where you're recruiting from. So that strong EVP is critical. And your EVP is built on a foundation of a very strong rewards program, and that rewards so that EVP is basically that deal that's brokered between the employee and the employer. It's everything that the employer makes available to the workforce in exchange for what the workforce gives back to the employer. Again, based in a strong rewards program, that rewards program having a key components of tangible and intangible benefits. So this definitely is the time to be looking at your EVP. I'm going to cycle back to some of this McKinsey data, which is showing us that 80% of their groups say that this crisis is materially affecting their daily work lives. Well, that's not surprising to anyone. But this one I love. They're seeing 55% improvement in engagement being possible through non-financial rewards, and a 4 times higher engagement for employees who are living their purpose at work. So when we really think about that employee value proposition and what are we putting out into the universe about what it means to work for your organization, these are all things that are really proving to be critical at this particular point in time. We're also hearing from a lot of employers that are talking about, those employers that had a strong employee value proposition where it was clearly articulated what it meant to work for this organization and the value of working for this organization and what that give and get is. Those businesses really use that EVP as their guiding light through this crisis, and were able to, and still are able to, weather this storm better with a more highly engaged workforce because they're already emotionally connected with what the business stands for. This McKinsey data, they did a great job of really pushing these drivers, the data, these drivers to the surface. And these are the top things that their data was showing that their survey population said were strong drivers of work experience, effectiveness, and well-being. And you can see job security, financial stability, which of course is financially related, fairness and involvement, respect and equality, non-financial recognition, and relationship with the company. So this is really the time to take a moment and really look at, what are those, drivers of the workforce, and look at some of these components that this McKinsey data is telling us are shifting a little bit and rising to the surface as being critically important. And then this one other piece that I just want to show, because I think, and you'll get a copy of these slides, so you'll get a copy of this. I think this is fascinating. It's this tree that shows that over this COVID experience, and keep in mind this McKinsey data is really fresh. It came out at the end of June. If you look here, it's the positive work effectiveness, engagement, and sense of positive well-being. And if you take some time to kind of go through this tree, you can see that at the top it's the overall workforce. But as you start to come down and you see the different segments of your workforce and how this experience is affecting them as an employee in a different way, and you can see your remote workers and their positive work effectiveness versus the non-remote workers, their engagement is higher. Across all 3 of those, your remote workers in this experience are rating higher. As you start to go down the chart a little bit and you see individuals, those remote workers with and without dependents, and you can see the difference between the work effectiveness, engagement, and well-being. And then if you drop down even further and look at those candidates, those employees with dependents, and breaking it between men and women. And a lot of this has to do with a sense of community. And when we look at the difference between the results between those with dependents and without dependents, and why that positive work effectiveness is higher, is because there is a greater sense of community. So I'm not, just in the interest of time, I'm not going to spend too much more time here. I just, again, this chart will be available to you. And if you take a few minutes and just really kind of analyze the different segments here and the differences between that workforce effectiveness, engagement, and positive well-being, I found this really educational in working just with my own teams. All right. So we're going to push forward and talk a little bit about technology. So, we used to ask ourselves, we used to find ourselves with a greater level of comfort in being in the presence of others. And today there's a greater level of comfort is in being in the absence of others. And so where we used to ask ourselves this question, if we were trying to get a group of people together, and we'd ask, well, is there any reason that we're doing this online? Shouldn't we be doing it in person? Well, today we're going to be asking ourselves, is there a good reason to do this in person? Because we'd much rather be doing it online. Let's talk a little bit about densification. So densification is this term and this concept that really came in, I'm going to say over the last 5 or 6 years, maybe the last decade. And it's this concept in the workforce of putting more people in a smaller space. And so what we saw happening over the last, 8 or 9 years, these businesses were transforming their office space and pulling out private offices, conference rooms, and creating these big, wide open spaces with lots of tables and getting a lot of people working very closely together. And they were, kind of cool and hip and very dense. And that is out. Densification is out. De-densification is in. And from the workforce standpoint, as we start to move back into the workplace, we absolutely are not going to see these big, wide open spaces where you're working shoulder to shoulder. And one of the things that absolutely will, is required, and the only way that we can make this happen is through more effective technology. And so when we talk about effective technology, we're not just talking about the systems, hardware, we're talking about your IT staff as well. Because if you think about the success of your organization, so much of it is dependent upon the technology and those teams of people that are driving it. IT is really going to become more necessary than ever as remote work brings about these new challenges around things like security and support. Employees are going to need strong IT staff to support both those in and out of office employees. We're going to need new policies. The new policies are going to need to be written and maintained. And IT and collaboration with business operations is really also going to need to identify tools to understand those metrics. And we've been talking a lot about metrics and how important that's going to be. IT is going to be really important in helping us to have the tools to be able to understand those metrics, especially around that remote working performance. So we have to ask ourselves if technology is going to help or hinder. And so how do we either stay or get out on that cutting edge? How do we increase productivity, future disruption? I hate to even put that out there, but if this is, we're on a roller coaster. It's not going to slow down anytime soon. It's just going to be a different type of roller coaster. Investments. Do we invest in remote working technology, or do we continue to expand what's already in place? We talked a little bit earlier about artificial intelligence and how can we draw that in to be more of a first line of response for employee questions. How do we get more digitized? Do we leverage technology to monitor engagement and productivity and maintain privacy? This is one of the things that's so touchy around this monitoring piece. It's like, how do we monitor performance and how do we monitor engagement, and again, maintain privacy? And then lastly, is this a time to be, looking at lower costs, changing vendors? Again, we have we do a ton of work around HR technology, and a lot of the work that we do typically is helping businesses to analyze and select new technology. Well, what's happening now is businesses are like, okay, we had that in the budget, but we're not, transitioning to a new HRIS. We're going to optimize what we have. And so businesses are making these decisions. How do we either make the most, or is this the time to make a switch so we can keep pace? All right. And last thing, I just want to recap with some of these 4 points here, and that businesses really do need to be acting now. And here's a couple of things to think about. Uncertainty is the next normal, and that's something that we just have to get comfortable with. We can plan, and we were just talking about technology. We're all doing our best, planning, putting things in place, but we have to understand that everything is uncertain. What we do now is that speed, information, and collaboration, these are the 3 components. I have those on a little sticky note here. Speed, innovation, and collaboration. These are the things that we just have to have in order to really drive our future performance. Growth, it's a speed game. That's the other thing. And we've learned this over the years, that those businesses who innovate fast, make those changes, pull those triggers, are fearless and get out there in front and take care of their people are ahead. This one we talked about already also. The talent market is flattening, and I love this term, democratizing. Geography just doesn't matter anymore. And the other thing that I can't stress is enough, we go back and we talk about those giant funnels of candidates. Top talent is on the move. I just said we're in the middle of a recruiting process myself right now, and I'm overwhelmed with the quality of candidates that we're talking to. It's wonderful and also super interesting, and it's not affordable to wait. We can't sit back and wait for our future workforce to happen to us. We have to continue to push and get out in front of it. And then, this is the last point that I'll leave you with. We do have momentum today. We're, eyes are open. I really want to stress what I started with at the beginning of this talk, which was around the fact that engagement, there have been benefits. I don't say benefits, but we have a workforce that wants to help and make this work. And there's so much we can do if we put our arms around that. So there is momentum. We as leaders have to see the art of what is possible. And as employees, we have to really be open to working collaboratively and figuring out, what is going to be that sustainable workforce of the future. The worst thing we can do, and this gets back to the point of, it's so important that we help our employees to see that there's not some switch that's going to flip and we're going to, go back to the way that it was. So there are old behaviors that, we have to be really careful that we don't fall back to, but more importantly, we have to help our employees to see that all of those things that we built and created, whether it's around relationships or communication or teams or technology, that is momentum that's going to carry us into the future. And again, not just, drop off a step when things get better, and they will get better. We know they'll get better. So that's everything I have. It is 1 minute before the top of the hour. So, but I would be happy to entertain some questions. I really appreciate everybody, sticking in there, and happy to take some questions.
And for those of you who may have to run, I just want to, again, thank you, Andrea from Hub International, one of our great chamber partners, for bringing this awesome information to our community. I learned so much, not just that the 24/7 worker is no longer good, because I do love hearing that.
Not a good idea. Not a good idea.
I've been known to be one of those, feeding my children and texting and, back for work at the same time. But so many things. I feel like we could have been here for half a day with all that you covered. But thank you for making it condensed, as is required in the Zoom world. And we really, really appreciate your time today to bring us this knowledge. So again, big thanks to Hub International. And if you're okay with it, Andrea, if anybody wants to stay to ask questions, if you can linger a few minutes, feel free to do that now. Okay, great. And anyone who has to leave, have a great rest of your day. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Very, very good today.
Great.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that was
The 2 Daves.
I know, the 2 Daves.
And we're agreeing. How about that?
It's wonderful when you two agree. I don't want to see you two get in a fight. It wouldn't be good.
We don't have time for that, do we, David?
No, too busy.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Audio.
Have a great rest of your day.
You
Thanks,
never
Elizabeth.
see
Thank
us in
you.
the same room together, so.
Right. I know it's different now, right?
Yeah.
At least we have this.
Yes.
Right. That's true. Yeah. What I think is so interesting about what you said, one of the things, many things, Andrea, but just the top talent piece.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
I don't know that a lot of employers are really, absorbing that risk right now, because
Yeah, it is. And for those businesses that think that their workforce is, like I said, holding on to their chair and just waiting, they're not. I
Yeah.
mean,
Interesting.
I have one of my technology managers. She's wonderful. We've worked together for a few. She just took a job with a really cool technology company here in Chicago, and I'm really happy for her. But I'm like, I had it was a great opportunity, and it's wonderful and it's all great, but what happens to the rest of us? Our
It's-
workforce is, they're taking the opportunity to,
yeah. Well, and if you think about how this period has caused a lot of self-reflection and introspection in people as well, there are a lot of people who are going to, really take a harder look at their job just because of the nature of this slowdown.
oh yeah.
And, is it really part of my purpose? Is it what I should be doing? And there's a certain courage, I think, that comes out of this, just by taking a harder look at kind of an inventory of your life in a way that you wouldn't have, perhaps. So it's a combination of just a lot of things coming together, which I think is so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
there's a lot of personal reckoning happening out.
I like that's a good way to put it. Yes.
I find that the whole transition that other people are going through really fascinating. I've been working this way since the early 1980s. I had my own business for a long time, but I was traveling around the country and eventually around the world training people on various things. And I had a little staff that worked for me at home, but half the time they were all my theater friends, and half the time they were doing stuff for our theater instead. And then when I did take a corporate job, it was with MySQL, again, as a trainer. And that was kind of nice because other people were doing the bookkeeping and the setting up of classes and that kind of thing. I was still involved in the development of those things, but it was great. They would set up my travel. I didn't have to have my own staffers do that, and that was kind of fun.
Right.
And these days, now that I'm retired from all of that and setting up networks of people working on nutritional kinds of things, I'm setting up networks around the country, and we've always just worked remotely. And I'm helping other people who are entrepreneurs setting up their own business, and they're just learning for the first time. So I'm finally learning for the first time how to deal with people that are learning how to do that for the first time.
And it's hard. It's hard as an adult. Adult learning. It's so hard. We need to be told over and over and over. It's painful.
They say
21 days or
repetition with
3
kids,
weeks, it'll be a habit, right?
Yeah.
No, I am the classic office dweller. A large part of my team was virtual, but I'm here in Chicago. I get on the Blue Line, go downtown, work. I'm one of those extroverts. I like to problem solve out loud, and I like to, that's just. So I'm one of those, that have been relegated to home and have had, so I, had to really experience that transformation for myself, which has been really interesting.
Yeah.
And so David, I applaud you for those experiences because it's just very different.
You were well trained for this, David, right?
Yeah, well, and even the training that I did, I was doing a lot of that remotely. So there are still some things out there that I did for virtual training company that they still tell me are selling well, even though they're totally obsolete from my point of view. But back in 1995, when I moved here to New Hampshire, I was doing a lot of stuff for Apple and other people, putting training videos on DVD. Even started doing a project for the community, for the Chamber of Commerce under Robin. I don't think you remember her. You weren't here when she was around, but I was working with Robin a lot on that kind of stuff, trying to put together a DVD for getting the word out about the chamber. and that kind of stuff.
Wow. So
Interesting
strange to think
times.
back, right? Oh my
Yep.
goodness.
Uh,
Great. Well, it's so good to see you all. Do you have any further questions? Any of the attendees still on while we have
Yeah.
Andrea?
Andrea, I have a question for you. I was just wondering, for your clients that you work with, for employers that are recruiting, are they in tune with just how acute an issue it is with the top talent, maybe leaving their organization or trying to recruit? Or I'm just
No.
wondering. Okay.
They're not getting it until it happens.
Ah,
It's like,
okay.
we're finding that, somebody is leaving to take another job and, being caught flat-footed or surprised or just,
Okay.
so there's not really that great awareness. And I think that, not to generalize, but those of us that experienced the 2008, it felt different than it does now. But in 2008,
Right.
there was a lot of fear. I mean, there's fear now, but back then it was like, if I have a job, I'm gonna sit here.
Gotta
I'm
hold
gonna
on.
be quiet. I'm gonna keep my head down. I just but I had a job and I was in an office and things were happening. And back in 2008, the whole economy was tanked. Now you've got some parts of the business, technology, you've got some parts of the business that are thriving. My nephew works for Amazon. I mean, come on, and then you have other parts of the economy that are not. And so it's just very different. And so you don't have that mentality where, people are not just trying to keep their head down and weather the storm. They're actually looking around saying, okay, what can I do here? And especially if the employer was not that great in the early part of the pandemic, like, well, I'm out. I got something else better going on over here. So it's really fascinating. It's really fascinating. And no, employers, yeah, that's why I love having these conversations, because employers, and once we have this conversation, then they're like, oh, yeah, that makes, and I didn't make it up,
Yeah, no, but I could see how the initial knee-jerk reaction is that everyone's going to be like, I have to keep this job, but it's not the case.
Yeah. So we're all at risk.
It's because with the recession, there was no lockdown. Like the whole remote thing adds this whole other element.
Yeah.
It's not just the economy and the workforce status.
Yeah.
It's this remote factor that's opening up such different opportunities. People don't feel like that.
And the fact that parts of the economy are just on fire and other parts of the economy are, commercial real estate. Oh, my heart breaks, No.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, the restaurant industry, entertainment. I mean, that's, but, you have this other end of the spectrum. And so you have, employees who have the opportunity to maybe do something different. Employees are going back to school, MBA, all kinds of different things happening, right? So
part of what we do is to help people learn how to set up their own little business where they can be doing part-time gig work and making it.
So that could take off right now.
That's
for
huge.
Sure. Yeah.
It does. That really, we had in March, we had a 40% increase in business nationwide for the whole organization.
That's great.
And it's gone up in double digits percentage-wise every month since then. It's been really nice.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure.
Andrea.
Thanks
for staying after class. I enjoy the conversation very much.
Yes.
We are the best students, obviously. So.
Right. Do we
Really
get
appreciate
an
it.
A?
You get absolutely A's across the board.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you again, Andrea. Have a great rest of your day.
Heather. Okay.
Take care.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.